Don here in Florida, and I got a question. You ever have one of those tools that you go ahead and sell and thinking you're never going to use it again, and a week later you need it? Well, back when I did the Don Uncensored, after I'd gotten well past that 50 video mark, and I just wanted to talk about some questions and things that I do here in the shop, I also mentioned that I was going to delete a bunch of videos, stuff that wasn't being watched or getting any viewership, and I had started doing that. I think I canned something like 15 or 20 videos, just deleted them, got rid of them. And sure enough, that very next week I got a email from Mark up in Missoula, and he said, "Hey Don, I bookmarked that gonogo gauge video that you did, and I went back to make one and the video was gone." What happened? Where'd it go? And that was one of those very low viewership videos. I only had a little over 100 views, I think. Nobody really seemed to care about it, so I just got rid of it. And on Mark's request, I'm going to reboot it this week. I cut about 15 minutes out of it. I knocked it from, I think it was 39 minutes or so, down to about 24 minutes. So this is the gonogo gauge for the 1.5 by 8, in case you're making a backing plate for a Southbend or Atlas lathe or something like this that uses a larger gonogo gauge. So Mark, here it is. Don from the past, take it away. So I sat down and decided that I needed to make a gonogo gauge, size 1.5 inch, a UN8 2B, and we'll tell you how we got there. Looking online, I see gonogo gauges in this size, 1.5 UN8, are expensive. They're all over $200. I can't find a single one for under $200, and they go from $200 up. So I decided, for as often as I use one, which isn't a lot, maybe it would be better if I just built one. The 8 is its own size. It's a UN8, so you have to be real careful here. Interestingly enough, eight threads in 1 inch gives us a pitch measurement of 0.125, which is exactly 1/8 of an inch. So this is pretty handy stuff to know. And what we're really more concerned about than pitch is allowance. And allowance is that room we have to breathe when we're screwing 2 threads together. You can't have threads that are perfectly sized together unless they're interference threads, otherwise they're going to bind. So you have to have a little bit of allowance or a little bit of a space. Now I made a diagram here. It's not very good. I'm not a very good drawer. But if you don't cut your threads with and we always say the proper pitch, but really we mean the proper allowance. If you don't cut it with the right space side to side, meaning you crowd it up or you make it too wide here, your threads are never going to mesh in. You're going to have the threads pushing away from each other and basically locking up tight. And this is what we use when we make a no-go gauge, by the way. Okay, we want to go from this to this. We want to know that difference here to here, meaning if we start cutting our threads, or if we cut our threads too narrow, the no-go gauge, because we're doing internal threads here, if we cut our threads too narrow on the internal, the wider threads aren't going to go in. And talking decimals here, and difference between the proper thread and the improper thread. So how do we usually get to this type of thread? Well, usually through not cutting deep enough. If you can imagine your tool being on a V like this, thread itself, if you don't go deep enough in, you're not going to cut the thread back far enough. Okay, therefore you'll have these wide threads. Well, we're going to cut these where we have the depth, but we're going to truncate the top, so that the threads should engage but then lock. And the normal thread engagement to lock up is about 2 threads. You should be able to insert in about 2 threads before you lock into a normal internal thread. And how do we know where we're getting? Well, usually we measure. And we measure by putting wires, usually wires, because that's the cheapest way to go. And these are sized wires. We'll put sized wires inside the threads opposite each other. And then we'll measure across like this. In the 1.5 UN8, the normal go size, which would be the basic pitch diameter, is 1.4188. Okay, this is like the proper size for a go gauge. If it'll go in that size, then it's good to go. A no-go, depending on if you're a 2B or a 3B, and these are the differences in our allowance. The 3B has a 0 allowance, and the 2B has a 0.002 of allowance or clearance here. These will be the determining factors of where we want to be when we're measuring. Okay, so on our go side, and we're going to have two ends to this. We're going to start with this block right here. We're going to have two ends to this block. We're going to have the go, which will be this diameter here when we measure across, and then we're going to have the no-go. Now, my original thought was to go with a 3B. It's a tighter tolerance, and I thought this would be better for the spindle. But when I took measurements across the spindle, I wrote them down here. I measured each and every thread across that spindle, and those threads, when I look into the machinery's handbook here, and I've got all the pages marked out. I'll probably make some pictures and put them up there for you. When I look at the numbers that I drew down here, they're really on par and fall into that range of a 2B. So, and I know some of you out there saying, oh, shouldn't it be a 2A? Well, no, we're not gauging for a bolt. We're gauging, and I know this might be a little backwards, we're not gauging for a bolt. If we were making a bolt, we'd go to a 2A. But we're gauging for an internal thread, so we're gauging for a 2B. So let's kind of try to keep that straight. So building this for a spindle that's closer to this tolerance, I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to make go above and below is 0.002 of a thousandth. So this has to be pretty accurate when we're doing this, and I've got just the machine for that. So why are we going all this trouble? Well, this is it right here. This is the spindle on the Craftsman Atlas lathe. I really hadn't thought too much about this. I was watching another gentleman doing a video on shortening up or reducing the size, the depth of his backing plates, because he was having chatter issues on his Southbend when the backing plate was pushing the chuck out too far. Now, I've never had any chatter type issues like he's referring to, but that could just be the superior design of the Atlas product versus the Southbend. Can you see me laughing? Alright, we've got 5 thousandths to go, but this is the no-go side, so we're going to truncate the threads on this one, so it's actually going to be under the major diameter. I'm going to look that up in the book real quick. Okay, so looks like we got to go in about 16 thousandths. like we hit it right on the money. It's amazing. Okay, so we're all set up for threading here. I got my thread size written down, what I'm shooting for, and we're not going to use wires today. We're going to use this no-name brand micrometer here for thread measurement. I've checked it out against the spindle over there on the Atlas, and it seems to be pretty darn accurate. So we're going to try this and see how it goes. We're all set up, we're zeroed out, we're ready to go. So let's see about getting some threads cut. Okay, let's just check that against our pitch gauge to make sure we're doing right. And we are right on 8. So back it out, bring it up, zero it, and let's take a cut. And you know what? It's always nice to have oil on there when you're cutting. Back it out, put it back in, and set up for another cut. Back it out, bring it in, and set up for another cut. Alright, let's see where we're at. Looks like we still got a little bit to go here, but remember, these are supposed to be the interference thread 2.0, so we're sitting at 4420. We still got 20 thousandths. So we're looking good. The machine doesn't seem to care for this cutting this number 8. It seems to be a little wonky in those. Everything seems to be all right. I took it out, I cleaned it up, deburred it, I took some sandpaper, ran it across there, polished it up, made it so it was nice and smooth. There's no grabbing in there anymore, so it's nice and clean, nice clean threads. And I wanted to just demonstrate something before I went back on the lathe and cut the other side here. This here is an Asian backing plate that I know is sloppy, and unfortunately it holds my ER32 collets here. This was kind of the reason I decided I wanted to start making my own backing plates. And if I put the no-go gauge in here, we know it should turn 2 turns and lock. Okay, let me get it started here. Okay, it starts right here. So if I start right here and turn this, I marked it on the top. 1, 2, 2.5, almost 3 turns around before it locks up. Okay, I can tell when I put this backing plate on that it's sloppy. I know it's sloppy. I didn't need this to tell me that. But this is what we want to use when we make a backing plate to ensure that we have a good tight tolerance. Okay, now this is a known good chuck. This is the original 3-jaw chuck off the Atlas, made in England, I think. When I get this one started, okay, it starts right there, I put my finger, I can get about 3/4 of a turn out of that. Oh, maybe a little bit more. 3/4 to 1 turn out. So I know that this is a good tight tolerance on this chuck. Okay, and that's what we were shooting for. That's what we wanted this no-go gauge for. Now what we're going to do is we're going to jump back on the lathe. We're going to turn the go side, because we want a go side. We don't just want to know when we've surpassed our circumference, or we've cut too much thread depth and width. We also want to know when we're sneaking up on that thread. Okay, when you take a go gauge and you start bringing it in, if it starts locking on you, you know you haven't cut enough. And by experience and feel, you can usually tell when you're about half a thousandths to a thousandths out, and you can just make that adjustment. Sometimes it's just a spring pass that you need to get to where you want to be. So the go gauge allows us to sneak up on the thread and get it into place, and a no-go ensures that we don't surpass that mark. Okay, so let's get set up and get back on the lathe and cut the go side. All right, we need to take 47 thousandths off of this to get to 1.50. Looks like I brought it right to spec with just a few spring passes. That's amazing. Clean it up with some sandpaper and then we'll know for sure. But right now, it's sitting pretty. Yeah, it's like too close. Okay, we're all polished up off the lathe. The threads are all clean and good to go now. I don't have my stamp. It's in my work toolbox, so I marked go and no go on the ends, and you know, eventually I'll just stamp those in there. What I did want to point out was this: on the go gauge, remember how our no go would only go in here about a thread and a half, if that. Okay, our go gauge now will thread right in there nicely. It has a nice, firm, good feeling to it. Threads in, nice, solid engagement. When I go over to this Asian backing plate though, look at this. When I put the go gauge in, remember we screwed the no-go in there, about 3 threads. When I put it in the backing plate here, look at that slop in there. Okay, this is what we're trying to avoid when we're threading internally. Okay, look at that slop. It's just all over the place. Whereas this quality chuck, you don't have that issue. And again, this end threaded in like 3 threads. When you look at this, it can fake you out a little bit because it looks like this side here is shorter, but they're actually the same size. And if you look at it, we're going to measure it, they're both 1 inch and they both have 8 threads per inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What kind of throws you off is an optical illusion. If we measure these, this side that looks bigger is actually smaller. We're at 148 right there with a caliper, and we're at 1497 with a caliper. This 148515 with a caliper. So what looks smaller is actually larger, but if this is larger, why doesn't that go in? Well, the simple explanation is this. If you look, this side here has fairly nice sharp teeth. This has the proper engagement teeth to go into a backing plate or whatever internal thread you've cut, where this has improper teeth. If you notice, they're truncated, meaning they're flattened here. And although the root is all the way to the base, or to the minor diameter, the distance between the teeth here to here is narrower than it is from here to here. This actually has the proper spacing for engagement, whereas this one doesn't. And this is what we were trying to create here. And it's by a minor amount. If we take our caliper here and go in, and this isn't a good way to do it, but if we take the caliper and go in, just by pushing down, we're reading 40 thousandths here, and I'm gonna have to turn that around, and here 45 thousandths. Now, of course, this isn't a good way to do this. The proper way to do this is with wires. And with wires, what we would do is we would put a wire in here, and I explained this before, and because this is V'd down this way, the wire is going to ride up and down inside that thread and give you, from one side to the other of the thread, a diameter, and that's the diameter we've been looking for all this time. So if it rides deeper into the thread, okay, it means this point from here to here is wider, and in this case that's what we're looking for. By narrowing that up, that ball rises up and gives us a different reading. And when we look at this part here, even though we're truncated, this area here to here is narrower, which would cause that ball to ride up, whereas this one here is proper. The ball will sit down and deeper and give us the proper reading. So when you make a go no-go gauge, you got to remember to always, one, keep these threads extremely clean. This is a gauge, and what I do is, I did this off camera. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit that film in, and I'll take some old school cotton string. I like this stuff because, one, it grabs. If there's any burrs or any nicks or anything in there, the string will grab, it'll pull, it'll tell you haven't sanded it properly. Two, when you put some abrasive polish in here, you can use this cotton string to work that abrasive. I run the lathe in reverse, so I can start in and always go away from the chuck, which is safe. And also use 2 fingers. Don't do the thing like where you're gonna floss your teeth, because if you do have an accident where that string gets caught in the chuck, you're going for a ride. And so I'll use one string to polish, and then I'll use another string to clean out the threads. And this polishes the threads up nicely. They're nice and smooth, and they're good to go. They'll work as they should. The other thing is, before you put one of these away, always be sure to lubricate the threads. And I like shooting them with a little bit of this liquid film here. This is pretty good stuff. It'll stick on there. It'll keep these from rusting until you need it. And you don't usually need these very often, especially on something like that. So you do want to keep those threads protected. Another thing I'm going to do before I put this away is, I've got some PVC pipe over there. I'm going to make some screw-on sleeves to these threads to keep them from protected in case they smash into something. And another thing, nobody has asked this question yet, why did you make it out of hex? Well, for the reason you see here. If I set it down on a bench, it's not going to roll away. And the other reason is it keeps the threads off the bench because it's a larger diameter than the major diameter of the threads. So it's a very convenient way just to keep that tool safe. I think that just about covers it. This was a fun project to do. I enjoyed it. Making a go-no gauge isn't for everybody. You do have to sneak up on your tolerances. You don't want to overshoot them or undershoot them. You want them right what the book says. I would definitely go with references. If anybody's interested in any Craftsman Atlas lathe modifications or work, let me know. Drop a comment. And I guess that's it. From Florida, Don out.